hope everybody had a great week. How did you do on your chore chart? Did y'all do what you were supposed to? What you were supposed to do was try. Did you try to do your chore this week? And did you get a star? How did you do this week? So today we are going to learn about Gideon and how he becomes a warrior. Do you know what fleece is? Have you ever heard of Mary Had a Little Lamb? Her fleece was white as snow. And this is the little lamb, and that's the fleece. You're going to hear about a man who squeezed water out of a fleece. Just like I'm squeezing the water out of the sponge, he squeezed water out of fleece, after they shaved the lamb's fleece. They used it to squeeze the water out, just like we would use a sponge today. So if you have your parents' permission and want to try this, you can get a sponge and squeeze water, or go to the sink and squeeze the water out of the sponge, and then you'll get the feel of what they did. Okay. All right. So sit back in your chairs, and if you want to, while I'm reading the story, you can color as long as you're paying attention. So here we go. The wool fleece, Gideon becomes a warrior. Okay. Many of God's people forgot what the Lord had told them. They did not love God with all their hearts. They worshiped other gods. Because they disobeyed Him, God's people were weak, not strong. They were afraid, not brave. Every year, enemy soldiers rode their camels into the promised land. When the enemy came, God's people hid in the mountains and caves. The soldiers ruined their food and stole their animals. They took everything away from God's people. Then God's people cried out unto the Lord. God heard their prayers. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under an oak tree. He watched while a young man named Gideon harvested wheat. Gideon was hiding the wheat so the soldiers wouldn't take it. The angel said to Gideon, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior. I have called you to do a special job. I am sending you to save God's people from the soldiers." Gideon said, "Our people are weak, not strong. We can't defeat that enemy." The angel said again, "God has called you. He will help you defeat them." Gideon said, "If God has really called me to do this, please show me a sign." Gideon put some food on a rock beside the angel of the Lord. When the angel touched the rock with his walking stick, a flame fired from the rock and burned up the food. Then Gideon knew God had called him to fight. On that day, God gave Gideon special power. Gideon sent a message to all God's people. Many good soldiers came to help Gideon defeat the enemy. Gideon wanted to be very sure that God called him. He prayed, "Lord, this piece of wool is soft and dry. Tonight I'm going to put it outside on the ground. In the morning, if the wool is wet and the ground is dry, then I'll know you have called me to fight the enemy's soldiers." When Gideon got up the next morning, the ground was very dry, but the wool was very wet. Gideon squeezed the wool and filled a bowl with water. Then Gideon prayed, "God, I want to be very sure that you have called me to fight. Tomorrow morning, if the wool is dry and the ground is wet, I will know for certain." When Gideon got up the next morning, the ground was very wet, but the wool was very dry. Now Gideon knew that God had called him to save his people. The Lord helps us. God's people prayed. Enemies had stolen our food and animals. God listened. Go save God's people, the angel told Gideon. Gideon wanted to be sure that God had spoken. "Lord, tomorrow if the ground is dry, but the fleece of the wool is wet," Gideon prayed, "then I'll know." God answered his prayer perfectly. Then Gideon prayed, "Lord, tomorrow if the ground is wet, but the piece of wool is dry, I'll know for sure." God did just as Gideon asked. God had called Gideon to save his people. Okay. So, why did God's people cry out to the Lord? Why did God's people cry out to the Lord? What did the angel of the Lord call Gideon to do? What did the angel of the Lord call Gideon to do? What happened to the food that Gideon placed on the rock? What happened to the food that Gideon placed on the rock? What happened to the piece of wool when Gideon put it outside at night? What happened to the piece of wool when Gideon put it outside at night? Okay. So take your picture of the wool fleece. You see the little lamb and you see him dipping it into the water. All right, get your stickers. You've got a angel of the Lord and you've got a little lamb that has no hair on top, and you got Gideon's hands. So place those in the picture where you think that they should go. All right. Let's see here. All right. And our memory verse is God said, "I will help you," Judges 6:16. God said, "I will help you," 6:16. Do you remember your last memory verse? Your last memory verse was Deborah went to the battle with Barak, Judges 4:9, or Barak. Deborah went to battle with Barak, Judges 4:9. Did you say that memory verse to your parents this week? All right. Okay, so let's do our disciple story. The most important thing. The most important thing. So let's sit back in our chairs. If you can keep doing this if you haven't done it already. But let's listen with our ears and close our mouth. And let's listen to our Simon Paul story. Here we go. "Come on, Mark," Paul's brother Mike called. "We'll be late." "I'm coming," Mark answered. He ran out of the room he shared with his twin brother Mike. Mark was carrying his guitar case. "See you later, Paul," he said. "We're going to youth group." Mike and Mark were teen leaders in the church youth group. Mark played guitar in the worship band. All of the big kids liked listening to him play. Mike was a small group leader. Every week he helped other kids learn about the Bible. "See you later," Paul called as they hurried out the door. Just then, Paul's older sister Susan came downstairs. "I'm leaving now too," she said. "I don't want to be late for volleyball practice." Susan was very important too. She was on the school's volleyball team. She was one of the best players. "Have fun, Susan," Paul told his sister. When his brothers and sisters were gone, Paul sighed and looked out the window. Soon his mom came in the room and found him. "What's wrong, Paul?" she asked. "Are you bored?" I'm sure I could think of some chores that you could do," she said and smiled. I'm not bored, Mom, Paul answered. It's just that, well, Mike and Mark and Susan all have really cool things to do tonight, but I don't have anything to do. Well, sure you do, Paul, his mom said. You could play computer games, or you could invite Dee and Si to come over and play, or... That's not what I mean, said Paul. I could find things to do tonight, and that would be okay, but I don't ever get to do anything special or important. Mike and Mark do important stuff with the youth group. And Susan's important on the volleyball team, but nothing I do is very important, he finished inside. Miss Shepherd smiled. Paul, do you remember the first time that your friend Ben came to church? Paul smiled. Yeah, that was fun. Yes, it sure was, Miss Shepherd agreed. And do you remember what happened the next week? Yeah, Ben's whole family came to church, he remembered. His mom and dad and his brother and sister. They were all there sitting in the front. That's right, said Miss Shepherd, nodding. Ben brought his whole family to church. And do you remember what happened to Ben's whole family a couple of months later? Yes, I remember, answered Paul. Ben's whole family decided together that they wanted Jesus to be their best friend. Paul smiled. That was really cool. You're right, it was very cool, said his mom. And now here's the most important question. Do you remember who invited Ben to come to church for the first time? I think I invited Ben to come to the church, Paul answered. You did invite Ben, Miss Shepherd said. You were the one who asked Ben to come to church. Because you asked Ben to come to church, his whole family became Christians. They asked Jesus to be their very best friend. I guess I did, Paul smiled sheepishly. Miss Shepherd smiled too. Leading in the youth group and playing on the volleyball team are things that are very important to God. But the most important thing is that people learn about Jesus and ask Him to be their best friend. Mike, Mark, and Susan are all doing important things tonight. But when you invited Ben to church, you were helping God to do the most important thing of all. She gave Paul a hug. And you're important to me, Paul. Now, how about a game of Frog Hopper on the computer? Sounds great, Mom, Paul answered. Okay, what a great story. So, what were Paul's brothers and sisters leaving the house to do? Do you remember? What kind of things did they have that were important to do? And why was Paul unhappy? Why was Paul unhappy? What happened when Paul invited his friend Ben to church? What happened when Paul invited his friend to church? And what did Miss Shepherd tell Paul is the most important thing? What did Miss Shepherd tell Paul what the most important thing? Okay. All right. So let's get our sheet. And it said, Paul is reminded that he can do special things too. Paul's older brother and sister were leaving to do things that Paul thought were very important. What things do you think are important? Paul didn't think that anything he could do was very special. Would you like to do something very special? Miss Shepherd reminded Paul about the time he had invited Ben to church, and Ben's whole family became Christians. Whom could you invite to church? Do you know somebody that you can invite? Paul learned that the most important thing is that people learn about Jesus and ask Him to be their best friend. Who is your best friend? Is Jesus your best friend? Okay, let's flip it over. And it says, ready to help. You want to match the tools to the job that needs to be done. Remember that God can use your help. So you have a little puppy, you have a snow cone that's fallen on the floor, and you have some plants, and you have some trash. And then on the other side, you have a rake and some different things that are for gardening. Then you have a broom, and you have a little kid with some dog food. And then you have a mop. So what could you do with the garden tools? What could you do with the garden tools? So take a color and crayon and color and draw a line to the garden. Draw a line to the garden. And what could you do with the broom? What could you do with the broom? Let's draw a line to the trash that needs to be swept. And then you have the little boy with the dog food. So let's draw a line to the dog. And lastly, you have a mop. We're going to use the mop to pick up the ice cream cone. So draw the mop to the ice cream cone. Okay. All right. So if you haven't done your coloring page, go ahead and do that. You can pause the video anytime and catch up or whatever you need to do. All right, so we have, for our project, it's called Helping Hands. And you can get a grocery bag, that's a paper bag, lie it flat on the side, and put your hands on the bag and just trace your hands. And on that, write Helping Hands. Or you could just trace your hand on some construction paper. And I am ready for God to use me today to serve and help others in a special way. Okay, and your parents can write that on your tracing hands. Okay. All right. I believe that's it. Don't forget to do your memory verse. God said, I will help you. Judges 6:16. God said, I will help you. Judges 6:16. You guys have a great day, and don't forget to be praying and ask Jesus to be your best friend. Talk to you soon. Bye.